is Colorado headed in the right direction? If that's where voters are in the state of Colorado, is our energy policy mirroring what Coloradans want?
Well, especially if you think of reliability and affordability as the top two priorities, I would say we're not going in the right direction. Since about 2004, average electricity prices in Colorado have increased 70%. So that's faster than the rate of inflation.
Yes.
At the same time, we're making concerted efforts to retire our baseload power plants. Baseload, as I talked about earlier, so the stuff that helps keep the lights on when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. So it's tough to say that we're really headed in that right direction because you think of, when you see those three prongs of what voters care about with their power, a couple of resources come to mind that can kind of meet all three. One of them being nuclear energy, which I'm sure will be a big topic on this podcast moving forward. And to date, Colorado does not have any nuclear power, and there's no plans that I've seen that are concrete to bring nuclear power to Colorado. So I would say, in terms of meeting those three priorities, Colorado is not moving in the right direction.
Colorado's actually backward on that. Colorado loves to fancy itself as forward thinking on this, and actually they are absolutely backward on this. Hi, I'm Amy Cooke.
And I'm Jake Fogleman.
And we're your hosts of PowerGab, a Colorado-centric podcast on energy policy, all things energy related in the state of Colorado. Jake, this is our first one.
That's right. Bear with us if this one goes a little rough because we're just getting this thing off the ground.
Right. Well, there are a lot of great national podcasts on energy policy, and I know you and I listen to them, watch them, but nobody's really doing this from a Colorado perspective. So what we're going to be doing on PowerGab, by the way, mark my words, I'm going to say Power Grab a number of times because I'll mess that up, but it is the play on words, PowerGab, because there is a power grab for your wallet and for your electricity. Yeah, there are actually people who want you to ration your power use. So that's the name, Power Grab. But we're the only ones who are going to be doing this specifically from a Colorado perspective. And Jake, probably before we get into policy and the politics of power and electricity and energy and development, we should tell everybody a little bit about ourselves. Why don't you go first?
Sure.
So you're far more interesting at 26 or the younger side of energy policy.
You're too kind. So I'm Jake Fogleman. I'm an energy policy analyst here at the Independence Institute, which is Colorado's free market think tank. I became a policy analyst in the energy space almost completely by accident. I'm a lifelong Coloradan. I got my degree from Metro State University here in Denver. I graduated in 2020, kind of in the middle of the pandemic, and was looking for a job in the policy field. I've always been a policy geek, and I found this little free market think tank in downtown Denver, and I applied to be an intern. Interned in a completely different policy center, but I wrote a few things, and I guess folks here at II liked my writing, and they asked me to come back. And there was a space to be filled in the energy policy space, and for the last 3 years, I've been doing it, and I fell in love with the topic. It's just so complex and so fascinating. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
So here's how I have described energy policy. So like you, for me, it was a complete accident. Now, our boss, or I should say, more your boss, I'm not certain I called John Caldera a boss anymore, but he runs the Independence Institute. Let's put it that way. He likes to take credit for me getting into energy policy. Wrong guy to be doing that. It was actually Mike Krause.
Oh.
I know, right? Who knew? Anyway, I walked in one day working at the Independence Institute. I was doing government and sort of transparency and good governance. And I walked in and I heard this, oh, Amy will do it. And I'm like, do what? And it was, you're going to write about tiered electric rates from a free market perspective. And I burst out laughing because I said, listen, what I know about energy and electricity, you can fit in a thimble and still have room for another shot. I mean, I didn't know anything about it. And you know what the response from Krause was? And this is typical. Anybody who knows Mike Krause, who is the editor of Complete Colorado, this one, he'll say, well, good time to learn. So I partnered with some good friends at the Competitive Enterprise Institute who sort of nurtured me through energy policy. And at the same time, it was 2010 in Colorado, and it was, we were in the throes of fuel switching. So for those of you who don't know, it was House Bill 1365 was a fuel switching bill back in 2010 that really started, it was part of Bill Ritter's, new energy economy. It was sort of the capstone of that. And it was to fuel switch from coal to natural gas. And I actually wrote a post about that it was December 9th, 2010, when the PUC made their final decision on fuel switching. I said, mark my words. And, doing this with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, we said, your power bills will go up. You're going to spend more for your power, and reliability will go down. Here we are, 13, 14, 15 years later. And guess what? Power bills have gone up, and the grid in Colorado is much more fragile than it was. And so that's how I got my start in energy policy. But like you get addicted to it. I have said it's like crack cocaine. Not that I would know what crack cocaine is like, but it is an addiction. I think because it's in everything.
Yeah.
Power is in everything. So the cost of power, if it's high, it drives up the cost of everything. So I actually founded the Energy and Environmental Policy Center here at the Independence Institute. I was on President Trump's, President-elect Trump's transition team for the EPA. And my responsibility at that point, I did all the digital and the media assets. By the way, there were a lot of them, and some people didn't even know about. So I did that and then came back to the Independence Institute, but ultimately left in 2020. Actually, the end of 2019, became the CEO of the John Locke Foundation, and we founded an energy policy center there because obviously it is it's where my policy heart lies. So we started the Center for Food, Power, and Life, which means we did energy, ag, and environment, and that's run by a great guy there named John Sanders, who at some point we should have on the show as a guest.
Absolutely.
Sanders is great, quiet. He's like a stealth bomber, comes in quietly and then drops some comment or soundbite that just blows everything up. So he's a fabulous guy. We'll have to have him on at some point. But that's how I got started, and have intervened at the Public Utilities Commission. So we're going to do a show about the Public Utilities Commission. I've done that as well. So we're going to be covering energy policy from all aspects in Colorado. And so, Jake, kind of with that, where are we now? You're the one who's been the analyst here. So where is Colorado when it comes to energy and environmental policy?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think what people really need to know, what it all comes down to, currently, Colorado is still a coal state.
No, don't say it. You said a four-letter word.
I was going to say,
loud.
As much as we fancy ourselves progressive and moving away from coal, which we are, which we'll get into, I'm sure, later in this podcast. But according to the most recent data available from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, which is the federal repository for energy statistics, coal is still the number one single largest source of our electricity in the state. Renewables are getting there. If you count renewables as a whole category, including wind, solar, hydro, biomass, and wood, which is another dirty secret that the state counts burning trash as renewable.
And by the way, we'll have to do a whole show on biofuels.
I think we should.
We could go down that rabbit hole, and it wouldn't be pretty.
Yeah, but if you count those all together, they're about on par in terms of a percentage of annual electricity. They're about on par with coal now, and I'm sure soon as a group will surpass coal. But Colorado is primarily still a fossil fuel-fired electricity generation state. And I think it's important for people to realize what that means, because coal, this is a term that will probably come up a lot in this podcast, is a base load source of electricity. So that means coal isn't dependent on the weather to produce. As long as you're putting coal into a turbine and producing steam from it, it can spin a turbine and produce electricity. You don't have to worry about a cloudy day disrupting your power supply. So that's been a good thing for reliability in Colorado. But as we start moving towards these renewables that are making up a greater share of our electricity, reliability is going to be something to keep an eye on in the state, because our current governor, Jared Polis, has made 100% renewables his goal for the state by the year 2040. And renewables is a very intentional word choice, I think it's appropriate to say, because there are certainly other sources of electricity that don't produce carbon, which is the goal, obviously, for these environmentally minded lawmakers. But renewables means basically wind, solar, and battery storage that may or may not exist by 2040. So we're headed that route. We're going to get rid of all of our base load. And
so it's all experimental.
essentially, I know you know this very well, but there's not a single grid on Earth at any sort of scale that is 100% wind, solar, and batteries at the moment. So it is really a theoretical exercise.
So there's so much in there to unpack. And I should also say, Colorado was also we produce a lot of energy.
Yes.
We develop oil and gas.
Yep.
We are producers of energy that we export. In particular, shale oil
Yep.
and natural gas. So we're an important state when it comes to energy policy.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
So there's a couple of things I want to think about. I want to ask real quick, and this is sort of so you all out there know where we get our information. We read this stuff so you don't have to. You mentioned EIA.
Yeah.
So say what that is.
Yeah, so it is literally a government entity that is tasked with collecting statistics on energy all across the country. So the energy that's produced by utilities like Xcel, energy markets that exist in other states, they collect all of that data and make it publicly available. So I'm on EIA constantly.
Oh, and by the way, you can follow us on Twitter. We'll get you those profiles, but what you'll see occasionally is we take snapshots of stuff on EIA, and I think it's EIA.gov or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can go there and you can see there's a profile of Colorado. You can look at retail prices. You can look at retail prices for residential, commercial, and industrial. You can look at, there's a Colorado profile. You can find out how many barrels of oil Colorado produces every day, which, by the way, we produce a lot. Not as much as others, Texas and I think we're fourth, maybe
Fourth or fifth, we're top 5.
Yeah. So we produce a lot of oil, despite the fact that there is somebody at the state capitol. I'll say his name out loud. Steve Fenberg actually said he wanted to end the extraction industry in the state of Colorado. Hasn't quite happened yet. And isn't there some kind of silly ballot measure floating out there?
Yeah,
I've been gone for a few years.
Yeah, there's a coalition of environmental groups that are currently collecting signatures on a ballot measure that would fulfill that wish by 2030. So it would completely phase out the oil and gas industry by 2030.
So I live in Weld County. Oil and gas is important to us there. It's a county with no long-term debt. There's a reason for that. Much of the tax revenue, the revenue from oil and gas generation, is used to pay for county services. Yeah. So when Weld County finishes a project, whether they're building a jail or, if anybody's driven out County Road 49, which is about 20 miles from 76 all the way up north, it used to be known as the Keensburg Cutoff. It's 2 lanes in both directions with a center turn lane. Sometimes you have a right turn lane too. Paid for that with cash.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, because by the way, the trucks can't move, and 85 and I-25, as you all know, is they're a nightmare to drive. So removing much of that truck traffic, you can thank oil and gas in Weld County for getting much of that oil and gas traffic off of those highways.
Here's a staggering statistic just about Weld County. So Colorado, as we mentioned, is a top 5 oil producing state in the entire country. 87% of Colorado's oil is produced in Weld County. So just gives you an idea of how prolific the oil and gas production
It sits
is
on
there.
top of the Wattenberg field.
Yep.
And directional drilling and that horizontal and then directional drilling made all the difference in the world. You can literally go to EIA.gov, because I want to get to something else. EIA.gov, and you can see the difference. You do it over time, and you can see how much that revolution, that renaissance in oil and gas production, and also reduce the size, the footprint of a well pad, because you didn't have to have nearly as much equipment out there. And you could produce more with less. So getting more efficient. But one of the things I want to let folks know, where do we go to get our information? So when you get up in the morning and you're preparing for work, what do you check?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a little bit of a news junkie, but when it comes to this stuff, there's a few major sources. The Colorado Sun, in terms of local news, actually does a fairly good job of reporting on energy and environmental issues. They have some longtime journalists that have been covering this stuff in Colorado for a long time. So for one perspective, I like going to the Colorado Sun. The Wall Street Journal is an excellent resource for covering a lot of industry stuff, because obviously it's much more of a financial and business publication, but they do an excellent job covering energy stuff. E&E News. Run by, I think it's an arm of Politico.
It is an arm of Politico.
But they specialize in energy and environmental issues. So that's their entire beat. So it's very important to keep tabs on that. Other than that, there's a whole smattering of Substacks and independent writers that I love to, Robert Bryce, I'm sure.
Yep, Robert Bryce is a good one. There's also, Utility Dive is another place where we go.
Absolutely.
Go to Utility Dive on Substack. Robert Bryce is a great one. He's power hungry on Twitter. Travis Fisher, Musings from the Fish Tank. Yep. Travis Fisher runs energy and environmental policy at Cato. He's phenomenal. The Energy Bad Boys, who we'll have on in our second episode. They are two energy modelers out of from the Center of the American Experiment. Also, Grid Watch. I go to I think it's Emmett Penny. So just a few. Those are places where we go to get information and just to kind of see what the pulse of the nation is. So with that, we actually did some polling on Colorado on energy and sort of where folks in Colorado are on energy. You want to share some of that? Because you did the blog post on it.
Sure, yeah. So like you said, we always try to keep tabs on the pulse of where things are. But when it comes to polling, there's not a ton of great state level data out there, and especially not in Colorado. So about a year ago, we commissioned a poll from Signal, which is a very reputable polling firm. They did great work for us. Basically it was just a broad overview of the energy landscape in Colorado, just asking basic questions to likely voters. And some of the key findings were, one, shocker, surprise, surprise, number one priority for folks when it comes to energy is affordability. Something like 96% of respondents said that's number one, followed by reliability, which is about 94%. So shocker, people like affordable and reliable power. But also there's a sizable portion of folks that really like environmental concerns, but it's important to point out it's slightly less, about 84% say they care about the environmental quality of their energy.
So if you were to take those numbers, affordability, and oh, by the way, I should point out Ready Kilowatt up there, which it used to cost so little. I actually want somebody, if you remember Ready Kilowatt, you email us, which is info@powergrab.org. No, not PowerGab.
PowerGab.
I told you I was going to say it. I told you I was going to do it. You know what? info@powergab.org.
That's right.
If you remember Ready Kilowatt, I remember the guy. He actually had a series on capitalism and free market economics. I kid you not. But that's for a whole nother show. But you think about this: affordability, reliability, 1 and 2. Environment is 3. Is Colorado headed in the right direction? If that's where voters are in the state of Colorado, is our energy policy mirroring what Coloradans want?
Well, especially if you think of reliability and affordability as the top two priorities, I would say we're not going in the right direction. Since about 2004, average electricity prices in Colorado have increased 70%. So that's faster than the rate of inflation.
Yes.
At the same time, we're making concerted efforts to retire our baseload power plants. Baseload, as I talked about earlier, so the stuff that helps keep the lights on when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. So it's tough to say that we're really headed in that right direction, because you think of, when you see those three prongs of what voters care about with their power, a couple of resources come to mind that can kind of meet all three. One of them being nuclear energy, which I'm sure will be a big topic on this podcast moving forward. And to date, Colorado does not have any nuclear power, and there's no plans that I've seen that are concrete to bring nuclear power to Colorado. So I would say, in terms of meeting those three priorities, Colorado's not moving in the right direction.
Colorado's actually backward on that. Colorado loves to fancy itself as forward thinking on this, and actually they are absolutely backward on this. And there are states, for instance, so I've spent the last 4 years in North Carolina, and North Carolina gets about 30% of its power from nuclear, and it has a carbon neutral goal by 2050. That's in statute, but what lawmakers did there is said, we're not going to mandate a resource. This is the policy goal. We're not going to mandate a resource, but here are your guidelines: reliability and affordability. Stick with those two. Actually, reliability and least cost, because what's affordable to you versus what's affordable to the elite 1% is going to be entirely different, or what's affordable to voters is going to be different than what's affordable to Bill Gates. So they said reliability and least cost, and then they said flexibility on technology and timeline. And what they ended up with, the preferred plan that Duke Energy put out, and Duke Energy, it's a vertically integrated power structure, or electricity, structure, meaning there is one sort of monopoly regulated utility and that generates and distributes power. And that's Duke Energy in North Carolina. And by 2050, with their preferred plan, the state is at 30% currently, and it's going to go to almost 70% by 2050. Guess who won't have reliability issues the way Colorado absolutely is? State's going to have reliability issues. North Carolina will not, because they embrace nuclear, which is clean, it's safe, it's far more affordable than having to overbuild on wind and solar and batteries, and it's reliable. That it's a base load. Why Colorado doesn't embrace nuclear is absolutely beyond me. Help me understand that. There was recently a bill in the state house. Talk about that real quick. And first of all, it was basically to help Pueblo, but I'll let you explain that to listeners and viewers.
Sure, yeah. So there was a bill that was it's actually the second time this particular bill has been introduced, because in back-to-back sessions it hasn't succeeded. But it's a relatively modest bill. It was just to reclassify nuclear energy as clean under the state's definition of clean. They have a list under state statute of which resources can be used to meet certain renewable portfolio goals and that sort of thing. And all the bill said was, we're not going to mandate nuclear. We're not going to demand that it's built tomorrow. It's just, if you're going to do clean resources, nuclear is a clean resource. Even the Biden administration agrees. We should probably have that in Colorado law. It was voted down on a 5-2 Democratic committee. The vote was actually 4-3, so one Democrat from Pueblo, like you mentioned, voted in favor of it. But it just goes to show you, it's even something as modest as that didn't make it through the Colorado legislature.
So Colorado's legislature is, polling showed Colorado voters embrace nuclear.
Yeah, so 53% approve of nuclear. If you ask them if you want to include it as part of the clean energy movement in Colorado, it goes up to 54%, and that goes across party lines. Something like 2/3 of Republican respondents like 53% of independents.
And young people really liked it.
Young people too, and even a plurality of Democratic likely voters. It wasn't a majority, but it was more Democrats than not favored including nuclear in our clean energy goals. And for some reason, the legislature doesn't feel the same way.
They're openly hostile to it.
Yeah.
Openly hostile. And there was a commission out of Pueblo that actually wanted to do something that North Carolina is doing, which is the utility there, Duke Energy, is doing this coal to nuclear transition. So what does that do? It saves you on construction, it saves you on power lines, it saves transmission lines. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't, a lot of cost savings if you do the coal to nuclear transition. And that's what Pueblo actually wants, is the coal to nuclear transition, because the state is planning on shutting down Comanche. Well, they've already shut down one.
Yep.
Have they shut down two?
Unit 2 is the middle of this decade, and then Unit 3 will be shut down by 2031, January 1st, 2031.
Huge employer in Pueblo.
That's right. Yeah, it's literally is a lifeline to a relatively low-income community in Colorado. So the community is scrambling to find alternatives since the state is making their biggest source of employment go away. And this advisory commission, made up of former PUC commissioners, tradespeople, business community leaders, spent about a year studying potential alternatives. And at the end of that year, they said nuclear is the only thing that's going to make us whole.
And they wanted to do that transition.
That's right. That's right.
And Excel actually even commented and said, we'd be willing to look at this.
Yeah, they expressed openness. They said they'd consider it at their next integrated resource plan. So when they have to go to the PUC and ask for the permission to build new resources. And seems like that hasn't made a difference yet to our lawmakers.
And you know what's amazing to me? We kept hearing back, so I'm going to go back to fuel switching. Remember, we heard about fuel switching, which was, one of the things they said was that it was going to be cheaper, that we're going to do fuel switching, coal to natural gas, and then what we were going to, the renewable mandates. So there were a whole bunch of renewable mandates, and one of the things that they said, it's going to be cheaper. Wind and solar will be cheaper because they're free resources. What they don't tell you, it's wildly expensive to convert that to electricity, usable electricity.
This is actually a good tease for our very next episode,
Yep.
Because we have some of the best modelers in the country that are going to explain why that is, because I'm sure listeners probably hear it all the time that wind and solar have never been cheaper, and the sun's free, the wind's free, how can this be expensive? It's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah, a little bit more to it than that.
That's right.
And in fact, the question is, and we're going to pose this to our guest for the next episode, which is, so how cheap are renewables?
Right.
We'll talk about that. But any last words on our inaugural show?
Yeah, just basically, if you guys enjoy this kind of content, if this is something that you want to see, please keep tuning in, share it with people that enjoy this sort of stuff. I hope you'll bear with us as we can sort of work out the kinks of this, but we hope to bring you a ton of interesting content where we have all these exciting guests that we're going to come on and share just fascinating information. I know you and I geek out about this stuff, so I'm very excited for what this podcast might hold. And
we're going to share with you information you're not going to get anywhere else. There are places that are really good at it, but we're going to give you, we're in the trenches so you don't have to be, but we're willing to share whatever it is we've learned. And if you've got a question, a comment, or a suggestion for a show topic, somebody you want to see on the show, email us at PowerGab. Got it right this time.
That's right.
info@powergab.org. info@powergab.org. And we'll see you next week.